It's story time. For the grandparents who don't know, I tell stories before every time I speak. And since it is Grandparents' Day, my story will revolve around Grandma's house. It's going to be great. I'm actually going to tell two stories. Is that okay? One's really short, though. Okay, but the first one, my grandparents, one side of my grandparents, is from Moundsville, West Virginia. It's right in that little tiny panhandle of West Virginia. And we go there pretty much only at Thanksgiving and once in the summer. That's how it was pretty much my whole childhood. I'd only really see my grandparents like twice a year. So it was great when we went. We usually went for like a long time. So since we went for a long time, I would have to bring entertainment with me, correct? Yes. So I brought a ton of typical 1990s, little boy play toys, which were action figures, right? Yeah, the X-Men were my favorite. I also had a lot of Star Wars action figures, some of those. That's right. And I like to carry all of them at one time because you have to play with all of them so they all feel loved equally. But I know that you can't really play with all of them when you're holding all of them, but I didn't really understand that. So I was carrying them, and the way that my grandparents' house is designed is kind of like a big circle. Like you had the living room, had two doors. You could go either this way into the kitchen or this way into the hallway to the bedrooms. The bedrooms, pretty much all connected together to go back out into the screened-in porch, which you could get in from over here, but you could also get to the screened-in porch from the kitchen, and they all met right here. It's like back screened-in porch area. And I was running away from my brother one time, and there's a sliding door that goes from the bedroom to the screened-in porch on both sides. And the sliding doors are made of glass, which you can't really see sometimes. And so I'm sprinting, probably away from Tim or John, because they're mean brothers. And the door is shut, but I don't know that the door's shut. So I'm running away, and there's a step right before the glass door, so I jump off the step and just smack into the glass door and fall back onto my back, and the action figures go everywhere. And Tim or John, I don't really remember which one, but they were laughing at me. And I was just laying there on the ground. Yep, it's my childhood. And then the second story, and this kind of actually ties into what we'll talk about today. The second story is I have a lot of cousins, but none of them are anywhere close to my age. They're all almost at least 10 years older than me. So it's kind of lame. But when I was a kid and the story of my childhood was getting beat up on by my older siblings, older cousins, older everyone, even at Thanksgiving when I go to my grandma's house, I will have to sit at the very end of the table because I'm the youngest grandchild. And everyone will be all up here, and then I'll be at the end of the kids' table until some great-grandkids come around. But my cousin, Jason, is a demon. And he was born almost 10 years, he's born January 17th. I was born January 15th, but he's almost 10 years exactly older than me. And he's not a small child. He's a very large boy. They grow him big in West Virginia. And he was really large, and me, as you can see, I'm pretty skinny. And I was even skinnier when I was when I was a kid, when I was 10, and he's 20. And he sat on me one time. And I couldn't breathe. And I was really mad, and I was screaming in a really high-pitched voice because I was 10. And after he lets go or whatever, this is what I said. And I was a horrible child at this time. I yelled at him, and I was like, "I hope you die in a car accident." That's what I said to him. And then, my brothers make fun of me for that all the time, because that makes me a mean person, right? It makes me horrible as a 10-year-old. But I thought I was going to die because he was so big. He was large. I'll come back to that later. That's the whole story, just so you know. It's a great introduction, I know. Okay, so over the last week or so, I've actually been talking with a lot of people, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on the things that I say, and a lot of people are kind of like asking me, they're like, well, how does everything that you talk about from week to week, like, we feel like you're saying the same thing every week. Okay, I kind of took offense to that because I was like, dude, I'm totally laying it out completely clear. But I actually study this all the time, so it makes sense to me, but maybe not necessarily to you. So in order to help everyone out and explain clearly what I think 1 John is saying, and to help the visitors that we have understand the context of what I'm talking about today, I'm going to do a little bit of a review. It's like one of those review games you play in high school or elementary. It's going to be great. And so, here we go. Here's the review. In 1 John, chapter 1, the first week that I spoke, I talked about Jesus, that which was from the beginning, which you've seen and heard. That what they're talking about right there was Jesus. And I said that living like or following and preaching Jesus brings true joy. And that was pretty much what I said in the first chapel. And so when we walk like him and we have that example that we're supposed to live like, and we live with a model that follows that, then we will obtain true joy. And not just like joy, temporary joy that comes from the world, but actual, real joy that we will see at the day of Christ when he comes. That was the first week. Then the second week, 1 John 1, verses 5 through 10, is there is a standard of holiness. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. That's what verse 6 says. And verse 5 says, and there's the standard of holiness, and we don't meet it. So we're supposed to live like Christ, but we also need to know that there is a standard that we need to follow to live like Christ, and no single person in this room meets it or will ever meet it on their own. But that's the point. So in chapter 2, verse 1, he says that we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus. Since we're supposed to live like him and we don't meet the standard, we need something that will help us meet the standard, which is Jesus, our advocate that we have with the Father. And Jesus makes us holy because he takes away our sin and makes us righteous in the eyes of the Father. And then the next week, I talked about if we're not using our advocate, if we say that we know God, but we don't act like it, are we really believers? Are we believers or are we liars? And also, if we are using our advocate, then it confirms to us that we are actually believers. And that was basically how we laid it out. It's like, you need Jesus. Jesus is what we look at. We don't meet the standard, so then Jesus makes us holy. But we really need to look at whether or not we are following him or not to see if we are being made holy. And then one of the last things that I talked about was how do we need to walk as Jesus more effectively? He who says that they know God ought to walk in the way in which Jesus walked. That's the stage that is set for what we're going to talk about today. And I think it's so clear how the gospel is spread through that entire message right there. It's like John knows that he's writing to a group of believers that have a lot of unbelievers in the congregation, that there are people in the congregation that are preaching a false gospel, that believe a false gospel. And so he lays out the gospel in the way that he talks. And he says, this is what we're talking about, Jesus. None of you meets his standard, so you need to trust in him in order to obtain salvation. And that's what we're evaluating here, and that's why John is being somewhat harsh with them in talking about it. And we're going to pick up there in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 7. And it says this, Beloved, I am writing you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I am writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away, and the true light is already shining. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. But whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he is going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. A couple weeks ago, I touched on verse 7, on the no new commandment that I'm writing to you, but an old commandment. And I said that what John is talking about here is that is Jesus. He's not writing a new commandment, he's just giving them Jesus, that which was from the beginning. And he uses the same phrase there for it. And it's the commandment is the word that you've heard. And then in verse 8, it seems like he contradicts himself. If you read it, he says, but at the same time, I am writing you a new commandment, which is true in him and in you. And I think that this is kind of like, let's say you're buying a used car. It's not really a new car, but it's a new car to me because I just bought it and I just got it and it's new. And so even though it was made in 2003, it's still a new car to me. And what John is saying is that this is not a new commandment necessarily, because it came about when Jesus came, and Jesus has already died and risen again. So it's an old commandment that you've had from the beginning because you've always had Jesus and you've always had the example of Jesus. Jesus has always been alive. But it's new because Jesus just came and he abolished the old commandment and the old law and the old covenant from the Old Testament, if that makes sense to you. But one of the key things right here is he says, it's true in him and in you. Jesus made new this commandment. And the way the commandment is love. That's what it is. It's love embodied in Christ, but also the command is that you love one another. This is my commandment, that you love one another, straight out of Jesus' mouth. And he says this commandment is true in Jesus because he lived it out. But it's also new because it has to be and must be and was being lived out in the believers. That's what makes it new. Because they are the ones that are carrying it out. And it dies and it fades away if they don't actually live it out. And the truth goes away. Because he's saying, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. The darkness and the way that they used to live their lives is passing away. And the true light, the way that they are following the commandment of God to love one another, is shining because they're actually doing it. And I want to talk about this new commandment and why it is so important for us to understand. And I think there's 3 reasons that we need to understand this new commandment differently than I think we view it right now. We need to understand the extent that this reaches, that this new commandment reaches to. Because Jesus extended his hand to people that we would probably think are not really worth it, or not really worth anything, and they are disgusting people. And we need to understand that this new commandment reaches further than we really think it should. And I want to ask you guys, who are you not extending your love to because you're being selfish? Who do we need to show love to when it isn't normal for us or natural for us to do so? Who do we need to love regardless of our feelings towards them or even their feelings towards us? If we are commanded to love one another, it doesn't matter whether I like them or not, or whether they like me or not. I'm to show love to them anyway. And this love needs to extend outside of ourselves, and it needs to extend to those who we don't even know. And that's why here at Cedarville, we're seeking to give you opportunities with PLC and with that Dining Out for Hunger to extend the love of God to people who can't really even help themselves. Extend the love of God to people we don't even know, and I probably will never know, but I have been given the gifts of the world, and I have been given a blessing of being able to come here, so I need to show the love of God that is embodied in Jesus and give of myself to other people so that they can see the love of God and can be loved by me at the same time. This new commandment, we also need to realize the length that it goes to. Because this love drove Jesus to the cross. The love of God sent his own son to die. Where does this love that I have drive me to? How far do I go to love another person? Jesus said that the greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. But at the same time, Jesus, I believe, would say that we shouldn't just lay down our lives for our friends or be willing to do that, but for our enemies. Because anyone can love their enemy. I mean, anyone can love their friend. That was wrong. Anyone can love someone that loves them back. But it is much harder to love someone who doesn't love them. It is hard for me to extend love to people that don't like me. And this love goes so far in Jesus' parables. How much did the Samaritan risk to show love to someone? He wasted his time. Wherever he was going, he probably didn't get there on time. He spent money on the person that was pretty much left for dead on the side of the road. And he probably also risked his reputation. Because helping out someone who's bleeding and dying on the side of the road is probably not the most popular thing to do. Let's be honest. How far am I willing to go to show love and to show this new commandment? And the last thing that I think we need to realize about this new commandment is the degree to which it is realized. Because if I look at the life of Jesus and I understand how he loved others, I understand better how I can love someone else. Because you can really only love someone else to the degree which you've experienced love. And I know that I have a Savior that was willing to be beaten and scourged and crucified and die for me. And that's how he showed his love to me. I can therefore, since I realize how much love he has for me, in turn, love someone else in the same way and go to that great lengths to love someone else. Now, maybe this isn't like super clear to you guys. Maybe you guys don't understand what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm being very vague. So, knowing that I was going to preach this message, I sat around and watched people here at Cedarville for like the last week or so. Just watched people. And I'm going to tell you a couple stories. There was one day that I was sitting in Chuck's, and someone has a plate in their hand and a cup in the other hand. They lose their balance and drop the plate of food onto the ground, and it shatters and goes everywhere. So how did we, as a community of believers, respond? Exactly. Now, maybe you would argue with this point, but I probably don't think that the person who dropped the plate felt loved at that moment. I feel like he probably felt hated. And this verse says, he who says he's in the light and hates his brother is in the darkness. Now the next story, I'm outside the SSC waiting for someone. I was actually waiting for Cam Hill, who was late to a meeting. It's Cam. Wasting my time, not loving me as a brother. I'm just kidding. But I'm sitting there and watching outside the SSC, and some guy walks out of the SSC and to the bike rack. And most likely because he was inside and he walked outside and it was bright outside, he couldn't see which bike was his. Because, I mean, he probably couldn't, it must have been the one that wasn't locked up, right? Because he looked through all the bikes, and the ones that were locked, he was, trying to, see. And then once he found the one that wasn't locked, he took it. And in taking it, he also knocked over another bike. And maybe the person that came out and saw their bike on the ground probably wasn't that upset about it. They're like, oh, my bike fell over by the wind, because Cedarville's crazy, and there's wind all the time. But the person who came out and had probably ridden a bike to the SSC and no longer had a bike at the SSC had to walk back to wherever they were. Did that person feel loved at the time? Most likely not. In the last story, I was in Chuck's again, and this happens every day, and you will probably see it happen today when you eat in Chuck's. When you're walking out of Chuck's, you throw your napkins in the trash, and you put your silverware down those trays, and you put your plates on and cups on the conveyor belts. Correct? Right, that's what you're supposed to do. The only thing that poor Chuck McKinney has asked us to do is put the napkins in the trash and the silverware down that thing. And you could sit and watch plate after plate go down that conveyor belt with napkins and forks and knives and spoons sitting on it. Now, do the people that you don't see back in the dish pit that have the extra work now to do that, do they feel loved? No. They're probably really mad. They're probably throwing silverware everywhere and dropping more plates, and there's more applause. But they don't feel loved. And the point is that it says that he who says he's in the light and hates his brother is in the darkness. And those are three completely ridiculous reasons and examples of ways that we don't love our brothers and in turn show that we hate our brothers. And I would challenge you today to look at this new commandment and look at the life of Christ and look at how far love drove him and how small of steps we take to love other people, and how not far we go to love each other. And I would challenge you to take a lesson from these people sitting out here in the audience that are visitors today. Because I guarantee you that in their lifetimes, they have seen and experienced love in more ways than you can ever imagine. And it takes love for other people to even make it, to be married for 63 years to someone. And it takes a lot of love to travel 5,000 miles to come see your grandkid. Are you serious? It's like my grandparents lived 3 hours away and they didn't show up. 5,000 miles? The love of God will drive you to places that you can't understand or imagine, but only if you let it. Because the person that's in the darkness walks in the darkness and doesn't know where they are because the darkness has blinded their eyes. And there are probably a lot of people sitting in here today that are not walking in the light and are not fulfilling this new commandment that don't even realize it because they are in the darkness. And when you're in darkness, you don't see anyone else around you. You don't see the hurting people around you that you need to love. You just see yourself, and that's it. And I would challenge you today to go outside of yourself and seek to find out how you can love another person, how you can love a brother. That's the challenge for today. Grandparents, thank you for coming, and we really do appreciate you. And I pray that we would learn so much from you and seek to find the knowledge that you guys have that we tend to overlook sometimes. Thank you for coming. I'm going to pray, and then we'll get out of here. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for today, and I thank you for the gift of your Son and the way that the love that he has drove him to die for me and for everyone else in this room. And I pray that if someone in here does not know him and has never experienced that love, that they would act on that and seek out someone who can help them come to know you and experience that love so that they can in turn love others. But I pray that those of us who know you, that we would see the love that you have had for us, and we would then love others in the same way and be challenged to love others in the same way that you have shown us love. I pray all these things in the name of your Son. Amen.